The floorboards of the castle's dental surgery area were cold and thick with dust. Jack Best lay flat on his belly, his cheek pressed against the rough wood. He could hear the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of German boots on the level above him. A few feet away, a German guard was shouting orders. The room was being searched. The Germans knew someone had escaped, but they couldn't find the hole. Best didn't move. He didn't even dare swallow. He was gone, yet he was right there. He had transitioned from a prisoner of war to something else entirely, a ghost. This wasn't just a prison break. It was a disappearance act inside of a fortress. The air was thin, smelling of ancient stone and dry rot. If he coughed, he was dead. If he sneezed, the game was up. But for now, in the silence of the crawl space, he was free. Welcome to World War II Obscura. Colditz Castle. To the German High Command, it was Oflog 4C, a supposedly escape-proof fortress perched on a rocky crag in the heart of Saxony. With its 7-foot thick walls and sheer drop to the river below, it was where the Nazis sent the bad boys, the Allied officers who had already escaped from other camps. The Reich thought that by putting all these escape artists in one place, they could keep a closer eye on him. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. By concentrating the most ingenious, stubborn, and bored minds of the Allied military in one castle, the Germans inevitably created an elite academy of subversion. As the war dragged into 1944 and 1945, Colditz became more than just a prison. It became a theater of the absurd. Inside these walls, a class system thrived. Professional rivalries boiled over, and most importantly, a group of men known as the Prominente, the relatives of the Allied elite, became the most dangerous pieces on a collapsing chessboard. This is the story of what happens when the most secure place in the world began to rot from the inside out. To understand Colditz, you have to understand these ghosts. Escape attempts were frequent, but they were also incredibly dangerous. The Germans were getting better at spotting tunnels, so the prisoners came up with a new tactic. A man would escape. He would vanish during a roll call or a work detail, but instead of trying to scale the walls or board a train, he would simply hide inside the castle. He would find a void in the ceiling, a space behind a false wall, or a hole under a floorboard. The goal was to wait until the Germans gave up the search and lowered their guard, then slip out weeks or months later. Jack Best lived for a year as a ghost. Think about that. 12 months in the dark. He and his partner, Bill Goldfish, lived in a tiny space they had carved out. They survived on food smuggled to them by other prisoners. They watched the world through tiny cracks in the woodwork. They heard the guards talking about them, wondering where they had gone. The psychological pressure was immense. You aren't just a prisoner, you're a secret. You exist in a state of constant vibrating tension. Every footstep above you is a potential execution. Every flicker of a flashlight could be the end. While the ghosts were hiding in the shadows, another group was looking to the sky. In a hidden attic right above the heads of the German guards, one of the most insane engineering projects in history was taking place. They were building a glider. They called it the Colditz Cock. Imagine the scene. The attic is dim, lit only by stolen light bulbs. The floor is covered in wood shavings. To keep the Germans from hearing the sawing and hammering, the camp orchestra would play at full volume downstairs, while a cellist struggled through a box suite upstairs. Men were stripping floorboards to create wing ribs. They stole telephone wire to create control cables. They used sleeping bags for the skin of the aircraft, pinning them with a dope made from boiled millet, the same millet they were supposed to be eating for dinner. The tension in that attic was thick enough to cut. Every time a guard walked near the trapdoor, the men would freeze, clutching their stolen tools. They were building a two-man aircraft in a high-security prison using nothing but scrap. It was a physical manifestation of hope, a middle finger to the Third Reich. But as the Allied armies closed in from the west and the Soviets from the east, the Colditz Cock became a backup plan for a much darker scenario. Because by 1945, the atmosphere in the castle had shifted from great escape adventure to death row anxiety. This was due to the Prominente. The Prominente were a collection of high-value prisoners that Hitler himself had ordered to be kept under special guard. Among them were the nephew of Winston Churchill, the nephew of King George VI, and even the son of the American ambassador to Britain. These men were not treated like regular soldiers. They were kept in a separate wing, watched by the SS. They were bargaining chips. Hitler's plan was simple and brutal. As the Reich fell, these men would be used to negotiate a peace, or they would be executed despite the Allies. The Prominente lived with a unique kind of dread. They knew that every Allied victory brought them closer to death. Every time the American bombers flew overhead, shaking the castle to its foundations, the prisoners in the Prominente wing knew the SS were one step closer to reaching for their pistols. The men tasked with their safety was Reinhold Eggers, the camp security officer. Eggers was a schoolmaster by trade, a man of rules and regulations. He took pride in the security of Colditz, but he was a soldier of the old school. He found the SS plans for the hostages repulsive. As April 1945 arrived, the sounds of battle grew louder. The American 9th Armored Division was only miles away. The town of Colditz was in chaos. And then the black cars arrived. The SS had come for the hostages. The scene was pure chaos. General Gottlob Berger, a high-ranking SS officer, arrived at the castle with orders to move the Prominente to the Alpine Redoubt, a mountain stronghold where the Nazis planned to make a final stand. The prisoners were terrified. They knew that moving usually meant a bullet in the back of the head in the forest somewhere. The Wehrmacht guards watched as SS began loading the prominent prisoners into trucks. The tension between the two branches of the German military was at a breaking point. The old school officers wanted to surrender the castle with honor. The SS wanted to burn everything down. Among the prisoners watching this was Dr. Berendrath Bazamidar. His story is one that's often left out of the Colditz legends, but it's one of the most powerful. As an Asian Indian doctor in the British Army, Bazamidar had been treated with profound racism by both the Germans and at times his fellow Allied officers. The Germans had tried to recruit him for the Free India Legion, a pro-Nazi unit. He had refused. He went on a hunger strike that nearly killed him to prove he was a British officer first and foremost. Now, as the world ended around him, he stood in the courtyard watching the elite of the British Empire being hauled away by the SS. It was a moment where the grand narratives of the war, empire, race, and survival collided in the dirt of a German castle. The trucks carrying the Prominente pulled out of the castle gates under the cover of darkness. They were heading into a collapsing country where the roads were choked with refugees and skies were ruled by Allied fighters. For these men in those trucks, the war wasn't over. The most dangerous part was just beginning. Back at the castle, the remaining prisoners prepared for the end. They brought the Colditz glider out of its hiding place. It was ready. They were prepared to launch it from the roof, to fly 2 men across the river to the American lines to plead for a rapid rescue before the SS could return to massacre the rest. The glider sat in the attic, a wooden bird waiting for a wind that might never come. On April 16, 1945, the Americans finally did arrive. The battle for the town was brief but violent. Shells slammed into the castle walls, the same walls that had held these men for years. The German guards, many of them old men and boys by this point, laid down their arms. The gates were smashed open, but the liberation was bittersweet. These Prominente were gone. The ghosts crawled out of their holes, blinking in the sunlight, looking like skeletons. They had survived the castle, but they didn't know if their friends were still alive. The Colditz cock never flew. The Americans reached the castle before the launch was necessary. It remained in the attic, a masterpiece of wasted genius. As for the Prominente, their story had a final surprising twist. General Berger, the SS officer who had taken them, realized the war was lost. He made a choice. Instead of following Hitler's direct orders to execute these hostages, he released them. He hoped that by saving the relatives of Churchill and the king, he might save his own neck at the Nuremberg trials. It was a final act of cynical survival, in a war defined by it. So why does this story of the Colditz still matter? Why do we care about a group of officers in a castle? It matters because Colditz was a microcosm of the human condition under the extreme pressure of Nazism. It wasn't just a prison. It was a laboratory. It showed that even in the most restrictive environments, humans will find a way to create. They will build gliders out of bed sheets. They will live in the floors just for a year to feel a shred of agency. They will maintain their dignity against a regime that wants to turn them into bargaining chips or corpses. Colditz reminds us that security is often an illusion. The Germans thought they had the best prisoners in the world locked in the best prison in the world, but the prisoners owned this castle. They knew its secrets better than the guards did. They turned the architecture of their confinement into the machinery of their resistance. In the end, the walls didn't matter. What mattered was the refusal to be small. What mattered was the spirit of men, who even in the heart of Germany refused to be anything less than free, even if that freedom was just a few inches of space beneath a floorboard. If you want to see more forgotten stories, hit like, subscribe, leave a comment with a person or mission you think I should cover. Thank you for watching, and remember, history is larger than we could ever imagine.